Serial killers. While you've all heard of some of the most popular killers and have all seen a million different videos about these killers, today this video is different. We're going to be covering some of the most deadly serial killers that you've never heard of. We're going to start with the less crazy killers, and then we're going to move on to the most brutal psychopaths of all time. Robert Hansen. Robert Hansen was a serial killer who lived in Alaska. He seemed like a normal guy. He had a bakery. He seemed to live a good life, you know? But behind that, he was a very disturbing person. Hansen had a dark side that was evident from a young age. His first crime that he committed was as a teenager when he burned down a school bus. This act of arson foreshadowed the horrific violence he would later inflict on others. Hansen usually targeted young women, often those who were struggling. He would trick them into getting into his car, promising money or jobs. He would drive them far out into the Alaskan wilderness. Once they got there, he would become a hunter. He would release these women into the wild and then hunt them down like wild animals. The Alaskan wilderness is a harsh place, and most of these women didn't stand a chance. One woman, Cindy Paulson, managed to escape. She fled into the wilderness, hiding from Hansen. Eventually, she found a truck and begged the driver for help. The driver took her to safety. She recounted being held captive in his home, chained to a post in the basement while he took a nap. When he awoke, he planned to take her to a remote cabin accessible only by boat. Hansen was a very dangerous man. He was a serial killer who murdered and raped at least 17 women. Albert Fish. Albert Fish was born in Washington, D.C. on May 19th. Fish's father suffered a fatal heart attack when he was younger. His mother then put him into St. John's Orphanage in Washington, D.C., where he was frequently abused. But eventually, he grew a liking to this pain.
Hey yo, what the fuck?
In 1882, Fish began a relationship with this boy. This kid introduced him to weird practices such as drinking urine and eating feces.
Hey yo, what the fuck?
Around 1910, Fish was working in Delaware when he met a 19-year-old man named Thomas Bedden. Fish took this man, Thomas Bedden, to an old farmhouse where he tortured him and did other crazy things to this dude over a period of 2 weeks. Fish eventually tied Bedden up and cut off half of his shaboing boing. Fish poured peroxide over the wound, wrapped it in Vaseline, and left him a $10 bill, kissed him on the cheek, and waved goodbye. After this crime, in January 1917, Fish's wife left him for another man. It was about this time that Fish began to indulge in self-harm by embedding needles into his groin and abdomen, and after his arrest, X-rays revealed that Fish had at least 29 needles lodged into his pelvic region. He would also hit himself repeatedly with a nail-studded paddle and inserted a wool doused with lighter fluid into his anus, and then he would set it on fire. Albert Fish killed at least 10 different people. Richard Chase. Richard Chase was born in Sacramento, California on May 23, 1950. He was said to be a heavy user of marijuana and LSD. Chase would also sometimes sleep in his family's lounge room, and when he did this, he would take off all his clothes, he would turn the heater all the way up, and he would open the windows all the way. His grandmother once found him standing on his head in the corner of his room. He told his grandma that he was trying to get the blood to run back down to his head. In 1976, he was committed to a mental institution for the second time. This occurred when he was taken to the emergency room after injecting rabbit's blood into his veins. His father found him vomiting in his apartment and barely able to move. The staff said that Chase gave them a bizarre story about eating a rabbit which had battery acid in its stomach. Chase killed his first known human victim in a drive-by shooting. The victim was a 51-year-old engineer and father of 2. He was unloading groceries in his driveway when Chase drove by and shot him. Chase claimed that in the lead up to the murder, he was angered by his mother's refusal to allow him to come over to her house for Christmas. She wouldn't allow him to come over because his sister was afraid of him following a recent incident when he ripped apart a cat in front of his mother during an argument, smearing its blood all over his body. On January 23rd, Chase broke into a house and shot Teresa Wallen, who who was 3 months pregnant at the time. He did you know what with her corpse and stuffed dog feces from her yard down her throat.
Hey, yo, what the fuck?
On January 27th, Chase entered the home of 38-year-old mother Evelyn Marath and proceeded to murder everyone inside the building. Chase also cut open a section in the back of her baby's skull so it would be easier to drink his blood. After he did all of this, he fled in Evelyn's car with the baby's body in the back and took it to his apartment, saying that he had another blackout while fleeing. At his apartment, Chase decapitated the baby. When asked why he did this, Chase said he was hungry. Pedro Alonso Lopez. Pedro was born in Colombia in 1948. Pedro claimed his mother was a prostitute and he had a difficult childhood due to the violence in the household and the absence of his father. Lopez was banished from the house at age 8 when his mother caught him trying to molest his little sister. Homeless, Lopez joined a street gang, and while in this street gang, he was sentenced to 7 years in prison for auto theft. During his period of incarceration, he was touched by 3 other inmates whom he killed, resulting in his sentence being extended by 2 years. Upon his release from prison, he claimed that during this period he had killed over 100 girls, mainly street children from indigenous tribes. While these claims are unverifiable, it is known that Lopez was briefly captured by an indigenous tribe in south-central Peru after attempting to abduct a 9-year-old girl. This tribe stripped Lopez of his clothes and belongings and buried him in the sand. However, an American missionary convinced the tribe to release Lopez and turn him over to the police. The police did not detain Lopez and instead was expelled from this country. After his deportation from Peru, Lopez resumed his killing spree, and although authorities began to notice an increase in missing persons, more specifically young girls, they concluded the disappearances were most likely cases of human trafficking. In April 1980, the areas surrounding Ecuador were hit with the flash flood, unearthing the remains of several young girls who had been previously reported missing. This is what led to his arrest. Mr. Cruel. Mr. Cruel has never been identified, and his 3 confirmed attacks and the suspected murder remain unsolved cold cases. He terrorized Australia Melbourne in the 1980s. He is responsible for the abduction and sexual assault of 3 girls between the ages of 10 and 13. He usually took his victims from their homes to an unknown location where he sexually assaulted them before dropping them off in other suburban areas to be found and returned to their families. On the 22nd of August in 1987, a man wearing a balaclava broke into a family home at 4 a.m., armed with a knife and a handgun. He tied the hands and feet of both parents and locked them in the wardrobe. He tied the son to the bed, raped the 11-year-old daughter. There was a reward of $200,000 for any information on Mr. Cruel, and that reward was later raised to $1 million.
$1 million.
Police described Mr. Cruel as highly intelligent. He meticulously planned each attack, conducted surveillance on the victims and their families, ensured he left no forensic traces, protected his identity by covering his face at all times, and left red herrings to divert family and the police attention. During one attack, he even took a break in the victim's house to eat a meal. On the night of April 13, 1991, 13-year-old Carmen Chan was abducted from her family's home. When Carmen went downstairs to get a snack, there was a man in the hallway wearing a greenish-gray tracksuit and had a dark balaclava. Holding a silver knife, he kidnapped Carmen, leaving the younger sisters unharmed. This was the last time he was seen, and then her body was found a year later by a man walking her dog. To this day, Mr. Cruel remains unidentified.